media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Tuesday edition of Point of View, and I suspect many of you have some questions about what has happened, of course, in Venezuela. And yesterday we had a chance to hear some of the initial comments from the Next Generation Roundtable, but I thought what I might do is see if we could put some facts on the table here. As a matter of fact, as I was out walking today, somebody came up to me and had read one of my commentaries, I think it was the one about Mitt Romney, and then later on in the conversation talked about how in some of these debates you can't even agree on the facts. So I thought I'd put some facts on the table, that some of which maybe you've heard, a lot of which you have not. Just takes some time to dig these out, listen to press conferences and the rest. And so I thought I'd start out with the basics. This is going to be a little bit like what happened at one of the Green Bay Packers' initial practices, in which Vince Lombardi holds up a football and says, "This is a football," because we're going to start real basic here. And the reason for that, I was watching last night on Jesse Waters, and they were out there interviewing people, and most of them did not know who Nicolas Maduro was, and they didn't even know where Venezuela was. So maybe we start with that. Venezuela is in South America, okay? Its neighboring country is Colombia. That's going to be important in just a minute. It is twice the size of the state of California, if that gives you a sense of size. 28 million, now they're saying 29 million. It was one of the richest countries in the world. The other day I saw an interview that was done with Senator Ted Cruz, in which he asked, well, how well was Venezuela doing, say, by 1950? And he pointed out that it was the fourth largest GDP in the world, right behind the United States, Switzerland, and others. So this is a country which, after World War I, we discovered had incredible oil-rich deposits, which then made it a fairly wealthy country. But then over time, Hugo Chavez took over, and he had been actually in prison. He was pardoned, and he won election in 1999 as a socialist, claiming that socialism would be the better way to improve the lot of people in Venezuela, and of course kicked out the oil companies. I'll talk about more of that a little bit later if we have time. And as a result, as the capital investment left, as the technological expertise left, it began to go lower and lower and lower. And then you have the death, interestingly enough, of Hugo Chavez in 2013. But before that, his vice president had been Nicolas Maduro. So Nicolas Maduro ran for office, won. And so from 2013 to, of course, just a few days ago in 2026, he has served. Now, part of the issue that we're going to get into, because people are going to ask questions of, well, is it even legal, even is it constitutional to take a sitting president from another country? And part of that has to do with the fact that in the 2024 election, originally, they really wanted the individual, Maria Corina Machado. If you're not familiar with her, she is the one that won the Nobel Peace Prize. And I'm going to give you some quotes from her in just a minute, but she was originally going to run against Maduro, but she was banned from running. So instead, Edmundo Gonzalez ran in 2024, got 68% of the vote, and yet the National Electoral Council ruled that actually Maduro won by a slim margin. So first of all, you've had almost every country in the world acknowledge that Nicolas Maduro is not the duly elected president of Venezuela. Venezuela. And so, of course, that gets into some other very important issues. But while I'm finishing just talking about Nicaragua and Venezuela and Colombia, Panama, and a few others, let me just point out that it is gone from being probably one of the richest countries in the Latin American sphere to probably the poorest. 91% of the people in Venezuela are in poverty. A very high percentage of those are in extreme poverty. Now that, of course, we have the possibility of some kind of change, which I'll get to in just a minute, there is, of course, going to be humanitarian relief pouring in, and even arguments being made by the president that he is going to try to do a lot of investment and rebuild the country, which was, of course, in his press conference, cost billions of dollars. And there's, in addition to the humanitarian relief, let's give Elon Musk some credit. He has made Starlink free to anybody in Venezuela so that they can communicate with the outside world. Before I get into the constitutional issue, let me at least for a moment talk about what a remarkable military action this was. The other day, again, I was talking with somebody and we were reminiscing about how sometimes military actions go the wrong direction. And we were talking about something which our younger listeners would not maybe be familiar with, but the attempt to rescue the hostages in Iran under Jimmy Carter and how that was a botched situation. This one very different. I mean, you have the military coming into the largest city in Venezuela, Caracas, which is also the capital, actually being able to pluck him out of a military base, was able to evade the Russian defenses, air defenses that had been put in place years ago, and killed a number of the Cuban bodyguards. 2 soldiers were wounded, nobody was killed, and of course, you know, after that, just incredible celebrations among Venezuelans all over the world, especially even in this country and certainly in the streets of Caracas. Amy Curtis put out a piece, Pete Hegseth vindicated, because if you start looking at the batting average here, certainly some high-risk actions by the Trump administration. One, to go in and to bomb the nuclear facilities in Iran. Number 2, to capture Nicolas Maduro, who is now pleaded non-guilty, and both they've picked up him and his wife. I'll come into why that's important in just a minute. But when we come back from the break, I want to, of course, also play a clip because there's a good piece which we've posted by John Yoo, who is a professor of law at the University of California at Berkeley, also has an appointment, I believe, at the University of Texas. And he said the president unilaterally launches a lightning-fast assault to overthrow a foreign dictator who harms Americans, oppresses his own people, and continues to threaten our national security. And he said that may describe President Donald Trump's order to actually remove Nicolas Maduro, but it also describes President Barack Obama's 2011 campaign to bring down Libyan regime and Muammar Gaddafi, or President Clinton's 2000 air war against Serbia, you might also add Bosnia to that as well, which stopped the invasion of Kosovo and led to the overthrow and trial of Slobodan Milosevic, or a couple other examples going all the way back to 1989 when George Herbert Walker Bush sent troops in 1989 and by 1990 had captured and removed Manuel Noriega. When you hear some of the Democrats, and we'll get one quote after the break, complaining about what's going on here, they didn't have as much problem, it appears, if there was a Democrat in the White House or the Oval Office, but they do seem to be a lot more upset because it is Trump. This is a debate I think we should have, and I'll come to that a little bit later. As a matter of fact, I have a commentary coming out, because if indeed we are not supposed to be taking individuals in other countries and deposing them, well, we've got a lot to answer for, because America and other countries have been doing this for a long time. It's worth a conversation, but let's at least put it in some historical context. And that's what I've done so far. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Last month, the Trump administration issued a national security strategy The document has traditionally been a list of national security concerns and how the administration plans to deal with them. The Trump document is different and thus has been controversial. The paper reminds Americans that the past few decades have been chaotic. I suspect that the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, had significant input since it argues that America lost its way after the Cold War. This is what the senator said on my radio program 2 years ago when we talked about his book, Decades of Decadence. Another accurate but controversial comment was the concern that Europe is experiencing civilizational erasure. Victor Davis Hanson says this is advice given to help, but it has been received by Europeans as condescending and interference into their internal affairs. The economic part of the paper is obviously aimed at China. The Trump administration doesn't want China to be dominant. It suggests we continue to maintain a triangular type of strategic relationship between Russia and China. This, Hansen explains, does not allow those two powers, one with 7,000 nuclear weapons and a huge amount of oil, the other with 1.4 billion people and probably the largest conventional military, to combine strategically. Finally, it also puts emphasis on the Monroe Doctrine, or a new Monroe Doctrine often called the Trump Corollary. We cannot have Russians and Chinese and Iranians involved in narco-terrorism in the case of Venezuela. We cannot allow cartels to make billions from human trafficking and fentanyl. If you want to understand American foreign policy in 2026, just read the Trump administration's national security strategy. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view of genetic engineering, go to viewpoints.info/genetic engineering. Viewpoints.info/genetic engineering. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, one of the questions, of course, that's being asked and charges going back and forth is this legal and constitutional? I do commend to you this 4-page, very well-written piece by John Yoo, and he is, again, a professor at the University of California at Berkeley, also has an appointment at the University of Texas in Austin. It takes us through some of the things. I just read a short quote from him, and I think that's appropriate, and we're going to hear from Nancy Pelosi in just a minute, but then goes on to even give us a better understanding of some of these issues. But first of all, let's recognize that when people are criticizing the action that has been taken by Donald Trump and by Pete Hegseth and by Marco Rubio, you only have to go back a few decades to find the removal of Manuel Noriega by the Bush administration, the posing and eventually prosecution of Slobodan Milosevic under Clinton. How about Barack Obama? And here's what Nancy Pelosi had to say about that particular military action.
I'm satisfied that the president has the authority he needs to go ahead. And I say that as one very protective of congressional prerogative and very supportive of consultation all along the way.
Madam Leader, you're saying that the president did not need authorization initially and still does not need any authorization from Congress on Libya?
Yes. Thank you all very much.
So that gives you a little bit of an idea. Back then, of course, you have what is called the War Powers Act, which after 60 days, the implication is that you have to go to Congress. Yet, let's just be honest, I don't remember Bill Clinton going to Congress. I don't remember Barack Obama going to Congress. I'll give partial credit to the Bushes, both Bush 1 and Bush 2, 41 and 43. But I mean, Bush, Herbert Walker Bush and George W. Bush. But still, let's get back to just the Constitution for a minute. Article 2 gives the President of the United States the authority and vests all sorts of responsibility in him as well. And vesting that authority of executive power means that he is the commander-in-chief. Also, we recognize that we have in Article 1, Congress has the power to declare war. And again, as we have always said around this table, even back in the days when Marlon Maddox was a host, we wish Congress and we encourage Congress and should maybe even demand Congress to declare war. Because if you look it up, and I took the time to do so, yes, we declared war in 1812 and then 1848. I guess that's the Mexican war there, 1898. But in this last century, we declared war in 1917 and 1941. That's it. have, of course, no declared wars at all under any president in the 21st century. But let's at least give credit to the fact that you had authorization to use military power, which was in 1991, then reauthorized again in 2001, 2002, which, by the way, was used by Barack Obama after it had been kind of lying dormant for some time. So, again, this might be a conversation we should have, but don't single out Donald Trump for doing something that hasn't already been done many times before by other presidents. If you go to other centuries, matter of fact, there's a good piece came out the other day that said Teddy Roosevelt would be proud. So we have to understand that as well. But only have a few minutes before we're going to get into one of our scheduled interviews in the next segment. So let me try to answer real quickly, why did we do this? And this is where I become sort of frustrated listening to everybody, because some people said, well, we did it for oil, or we did it for drugs, or we did it because of terrorism, because there's narco-terrorism, or we did it because they were in our hemisphere, or we did it because of Trump's ego, whatever it might be. And so when people ask me, why did we do it? I go, yes, because what I mean is all of the above. And the other day, I finally heard Glenn Beck, of all people, say that's exactly his perspective. And it is not necessarily always planned, but as you probably know, I do my commentaries about a week or so ahead of time. Matter of fact, I'll be taping after the program today, one for January 16th, so you can see that oftentimes I never know what's coming. But the commentary today is on the national security strategy, in which I talk about the fact that last month the president and his administration posted a national security strategy, and in there's a whole section on the Monroe Doctrine, or what now is called the New Monroe Doctrine, or the Trump Corollary. Or then we even saw him making a joke about the Don Roe Doctrine. And it gets into the whole issue of the fact that Russians and Chinese and Iranians are involved in narco-terrorism in Venezuela. So you have some of the reasons right there. Okay, let me run through the list very quickly because we're running out of time, and I'll postpone the rest to the second hour. Is it oil? Yes, but not the way you think it is. First of all, how much oil? Well, the best estimates are 304 billion barrels of oil. But again, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, the other day, when asked about this, said, we don't need the oil. And you think about that, and that's right. I mean, oil prices are going down because we have quite a bit of oil because, remember, drill, baby, drill. So why is it oil? Because oil affects China. Who buys more Venezuelan oil than any other country in the world? I'll pause. You know what I'm going to say. China. 68% of the oil that was produced in Venezuela goes to China. So you can begin to see that China is buying oil from Russia and from Iran and from Venezuela. Well, now, at least at the moment, we have some kind of oversight over that. As one commentator posted the other day, this is the first time that the world energy supplies, at least a majority of them, have been in the hands of Westerners. Because you remember back in the 1970s, for example, OPEC, under the hands of military, Muslims, all sorts of things. This is very interesting. Now, to be true, also the oil that comes from Venezuela, as I pointed out the other day in one of the commentaries, is a very heavy, dark, really kind of viscous oil. And it turns out that the refineries most equipped to refine that are in Louisiana and Texas. And actually, the other oil that we get, most of which, a lot of it is coming from fracking. If you've ever seen that, and I need to maybe get some and bring it here in the studio so you can see what it looks like. It almost looks like a smoothie. I mean, it's sort of light. It's multicolored. It's refined in a much different way. I mean, some of the oil almost is clear. So first of all, is it oil? Yes, but more to keep China and to have some control over China. Is it drugs? Well, of course. Drug cartels cartels, Colombia guerrillas. Let me quote from Maria Corina Machado, again, who's won the Peace Prize. She said, we had Russian agents, we had Iranian agents, we have terrorist groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, we have Colombian guerrillas, we have drug cartels. Venezuela had become a criminal hub of the Americas, which of course gets us also into terrorism, because you had not only China and Russia and Iran, you had Hezbollah and Hamas in Venezuela. And almost every other country in Latin America has been willing to cooperate with the United States. Not only has Venezuela not cooperated with the United States, it's been actually going the other direction. And then, of course, the whole issue of the hemisphere itself, because of some of this and because of just completely running the country into ground, here's a number, 8 million Venezuelans have left the country. A large number of them have come here, and some of them have been Venezuelan gangs like Tren de Agua and things of that nature. And so you have all sorts of other reasons to actually address Venezuela compared to other countries in Latin America. And then don't forget, not only oil, but there's a couple other issues. First of all, there's just an enormous amount of gold in Venezuela. But talk about another one that's starting to surface, Bitcoin. Yes, turns out that Maduro, I've been thinking about Noriega for a while there. For Maduro, he on paper has quite a number, maybe about 220,000 Bitcoin, but they believe there are all sorts of shadow accounts, so probably 600,000 Bitcoin. That works out to be $600 billion in Bitcoin. If we have access to those private keys, I suspect that Bitcoin ends up in the strategic Bitcoin reserve. So the bottom line is, why the reasons? Well, actually, let me count the ways. There are many reasons. Some of them are economic. Some of them are political. Some of them are to fight terrorism. Some of them are to prevent some of our enemies from getting a foothold. But all of those together, I think, illustrate why Venezuela, when we have so many other countries in Central America and South America, I think maybe you can begin to see what exactly has been taking place. Anyway, we need to take a break. We're going to move on to some other topics, but I will rejoin later because some people say, well, what does the future look like in Venezuela? Got some ideas about that. We'll take a break and be back with more right after this.
It almost seems like we live in a different world from many people in positions of authority. They say men can be women and women men. People are prosecuted differently or not at all, depending on their politics. Criminals are more valued and rewarded than law-abiding citizens. It's so overwhelming, so demoralizing. You feel like giving up. But we can't. We shouldn't. We must not. As Winston Churchill said to Britain in the darkest days of World War II, never give in, never give in, never, 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 never yield to force, never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy. And that's what we say to you today. This is not a time to give in, but to step up and join Point of View in providing clarity in the chaos. We can't do it alone, but together, with God's help, we will overcome the darkness. Invest in biblical clarity today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, we're going to change topics for a little bit, but we'll come back to this issue of Venezuela a little bit later. But this was scheduled, and I think it illustrates exactly what could happen in the future. Because if you're not familiar with Eastern European mission, as the Berlin Wall fell down, there were more opportunities for ministry, especially in Eastern Europe, than ever existed. Of course, you had Brother Andrew and all sorts of other individuals, but here is an organization now over the last about 60 years that has provided Bibles and Bible-based materials in 30 different languages in more than 35 different countries. And I thought it would be good for you to know about that, for you to maybe joint venture with them, partner with them, get involved in one way or another. And so we bring to the microphone to the Vice President of Eastern European Mission, Dirk Smith. He actually came there after being a development officer with his alma mater, Hardin University, has a bachelor's degree as well as an MBA with a focus on organizational development and ethics. So, Dirk, thank you for being with us today here on Point of View.
Kerby, great to be with you.
You know, we were talking about how when the Berlin Wall fell, there were opportunities for ministry. And a little bit later, I'm going to talk about what next. But, you know, with maybe removing some of the authoritarian leadership in Venezuela and in other places as well, great opportunities for ministry. And really, that's your history, because it was a very dedicated couple, if I remember right, that said these people need the Bible. They don't have access to it, and we probably have multiple Bibles layering around our house. But even if we were to provide them with Bibles, they'd be English Bibles, and they need them in their own language. And so that's really kind of the history of Eastern European missions, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It began with 7 couples, actually, who had just finished their undergrads. They're in their 20s. These are 20-something kids that leave Abilene Christian College at the time and head to Vienna, Austria, to enroll in grad school so that then they could go behind the Iron Curtain and teach people about Jesus. But the couple you're referencing, Gwen and Gail Hensley, Gwen, he came back from one of these trips and told his wife Gail, he said, "This is an impossible task. I mean, how do we teach people about Jesus? They don't have Bibles in their language." And that he was, I credit him with being the entrepreneur for Jesus. And he really turned the ministry on its head and began printing what we affectionately refer to as Marlboro Bible, the Marlboro Bible, because it was the exact size of a pack of cigarettes. The guards didn't care if you smuggled cigarettes in. They just didn't want any guns or Bibles. Those were the 2 things they always asked. So that began a printing operation and smuggling and printing and supplying Bibles for other smugglers. So you mentioned Father Andrew, or Brother Andrew. I mean, there was indication that possibly we supplied some Bibles to them way back in the day. So it was a very, very fun, kind of Christian espionage time in our history. And then, of course, the wall comes down in '89, as we all know. And as you mentioned with Venezuela, when you get freedom, and there were a lot of people at that time when the wall came down that said to EEM, "Hey, they have freedom. You guys need to go somewhere else. Go to China. Go to one of these other areas that, there's communism." And I'm so thankful to the men and women who were on our board at the time who said, "No, we feel a calling from God to be right here. And we're going to stay put." Because as we know in this country, with freedom comes responsibility. And just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do all that you are allowed to do. And you have to exercise really good judgment. And if it's not founded on God, things can really go awry, as we've seen in our country and other countries like Venezuela, when God gets tossed out or there's an authoritarian, godless leadership, lots of evil occurs.
So again, one of the things I think is so encouraging is to look at some of the pictures. And so we have that link on the website. You can just find the picture of Dirk, just go right down, it goes, or else you can just go to eem.org. And the first thing you'll notice is you can't read the cover of the Bibles. And that, Dirk, brings me to another point, and that is oftentimes we have a great vision for when we see English Bibles or maybe even Spanish or Italian or German. It still has our language, if you will, and our letters of the alphabet. But in many cases, you're having Cyrillic here. So even as you see these pictures and these now full Bibles, not the marble Bibles that we talked about in the past, they look different. And in some respects, that's why maybe the world has kind of hopped over Eastern Europe. And now, because of the war between Russia and Ukraine, because I usually every year go to Hungary, we have others that go to the Czech Republic, others that go to Romania. We're hearing about that a little bit more, but in large part, we haven't seen this as a vital mission field. And that's why I'm so grateful that the individuals that were involved with your ministry decided to keep you there, seeing that as your mission field.
Yes, we are very spoiled, Kerby, in the English language. In the English-speaking world, there are somewhere around 600 different translations of the Bible. But in the Cyrillic, as you mentioned, Cyrillic, and last year we did 32 different languages. There are one at best. I know of a couple of countries where there are 3 different translations, but they are so expensive and not available. So we go in and we really believe in creating economy. So when we're distributing in Ukraine, for example, we're printing in Ukraine. We do the same thing in Romania, Bulgaria, Croatia, et cetera, Serbia, and all the different nations that we work in. But the requests are just pouring in. And yes, you mentioned the war, and sometimes that gets very far. It gets far removed for us. I liken it to a chronic disease. You know, when someone is diagnosed with a chronic disease, all your friends and family come around and they're eager to help. What can we do? What can we do? But as the disease wears on, people forget. They just forget because they get busy in their own world, and that's really where we are. We forget that Ukraine is just being decimated on a daily basis. Heard a story the other day of a little boy. His name is Lev, and Lev's about 7 years old. And Lev, at 7 years old, Kerby, I don't know what you were doing. I was not involved in what he is. My specialty was not his. But his specialty now, because of the war, he can tell whether it's a drone, whether it's a plane, whether it's a missile, and he can tell how far away it is, and whether everyone needs to run for cover and hit the bomb shelters or not. At 7 years of age.
Yeah.
That's reality.
What a world. Yeah.
And that's it. So, yeah, it's turned up soil, and they're looking for hope, and we have never seen distribution as high. We hit our 2 million book mark. Earliest we ever had this year is the end of November. We distributed 2 million this year, and it just continues to rise.
Let me use those numbers again. 2 million Bibles and Bible-based materials distributed in 2024 across 36 nations, 32 languages. 570,000 children and teens received Bibles through the Bibles for Kids campaign. And, of course, over 3,000 trusted field partners as well. And so just for a minute, talk about the distribution, because these go to schools, they go to orphanages, they go to prisons, of course, they go to churches. Talk about that, if you might.
Yeah, Kerby, we have over 3,000 partners on the ground. Some are going to be partners that people will be familiar with, like Prison Fellowship International, PFI. Every Home for Christ, people might be familiar with. But then there are lots of, as you mentioned, churches, hospital organizations. We are like the wholesaler for free, working with over 3,000 retailers, for lack of a better explanation.
Sure.
And as they make requests, we vet those requests. And the only thing we ask, number one, every book says it's free. You should not have paid for this book. So they don't charge, they don't sell the books. And number two, they don't go in a drawer or on a shelf. They're going into someone's hands. And then thirdly, as I mentioned, we're kind of the wholesaler. So we ask for stories. Just tell us. Give us the stories from the front line of what God is doing. Give us the God stories. And we get some amazing stories from these all-in, authentic disciples of Jesus who the reason the requests are pouring in, I tell people over and over again, is because The people who are asking for them are people whose lives have been transformed. So when you have the cure for everything, anxiety, depression, whatever, you're not going to keep that to yourself. You're going to share it. And these are people that are engaging with the Bible. It's not sitting on their end table. They are in God's word daily. And so they are being transformed, and they want that for other people. They want to share Jesus.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation, but there's a section on EEM.org, Global Transformation Stories. I think you will really appreciate those. God's Word cannot be contained, controlled, or confined. And just one more illustration of that. And we'll come back and talk with Dirk Smith right after this.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, and we're spending just a few more minutes with Dirk Smith, but if you're not familiar, Eastern European Missions, EEM.org. And I might just say that, first of all, we do want to talk for just a few minutes about how you can get involved, but let me also get you thinking about people in your neighborhood. For example, the people literally across the street from us, they're from Russia. He's from Siberia. She's from Moscow. Okay, Russian Bible. Walk a little further. There is a couple. They're from Ukraine and really upset about what's going on there. Maybe you've read into some people that are from Estonia, and you go, I don't even know where I'd find a Bible in Estonian, or maybe a variety of others, or like this. Maybe you've met somebody from Romania, Poland, whatever it might be. This would be a great resource for you to find out more about, and certainly that is the case. But let's, if we can, for just a minute, talk, Dirk, not only about what individuals can do through you and how they might support you, but how can local churches and ministries work with you in some way or another?
Yeah, the best way, honestly, Kerby, is we have more requests than we can fulfill. Our European team, we've seen a increase this year. It's probably going to be a little over 8% from distribution last year, so we're going to be over 2 million again, probably pushing 2.2 million. So the requests are pouring in, and we keep our expenses extremely low. $5 provides a book to someone in their heart language who has never had a Bible before. So they can go on our website, EEM.org, that you mentioned, and look for ways to get involved. But pray for us, pray for our organization, pray for wisdom, for our boldness. But if they want to become partners and partner in this work, they can do that very easily, give securely online. And we will begin we'll have our Bibles for Kids campaign, which will begin at the first 6 months of this year. We'll begin in March. Actually, we'll kick it off officially, and we don't have all the numbers in for that yet, but just lots of opportunity to share a Bible. So I jokingly tell people, give up the overpriced cup of coffee, and you can change somebody's life eternally.
Let's talk about, for a moment, why there is such a need right now and why there's such spiritual hunger. It's been my experience, and I don't travel to as many countries as you do, but I get to go occasionally to a place like, especially Budapest, Hungary, or places like that, or Romania. And what you find is that having lived, or maybe their parents having lived under communism and seen the deprivation that created, and then coming to this idea, well, maybe we'll reject this and we'll buy into an idea of a free market, but then materialism doesn't really meet needs either. And I do sense that there is a greater spiritual hunger in Eastern Europe than ever before. And then add to that this conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which has spilled over into these other countries because of refugees. And there is probably the greatest spiritual hunger that we've seen in our generation, don't you think?
Very true, Kerby. Very true. You've said it very succinctly. Yeah, if you look at a map, and again, as Americans, we're not great on our European geography.
No,
and that's okay. I don't expect for people to know all the countries that I know. But if you look at that map and you realize here's Russia pouring into Ukraine, and getting as far as Lviv, which is farthest west part of Ukraine. Imagine, if you will, Mexico is the superpower that Russia is. And Mexico has invaded southern Texas. And it's moved up as far as Dallas-Fort Worth. The bombs and the missiles and the drones are hitting Dallas-Fort Worth, and people begin fleeing. So you have 6 million refugees, and then another 3 to 4 million internally displaced people. So 6 million people now are fleeing up into Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, those neighboring states, if you will, and these would be the countries in Europe because of the nature of the size. And they're coming in and they're telling these firsthand stories of what's happening and how they've lost loved ones, lost children, lost mothers, husbands, grandparents, etc. This becomes very real. And so for this part of the world, you've got people in Poland, Bulgaria, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania. I mean, this is all very close. And so their soil is being churned up. They want hope. They are hearing the stories. And the beautiful part is you've got Ukrainian believers who are really being disciples for Jesus because they are traveling through this hell, and they're traveling alongside non-believers. And the non-believers are looking at them and saying, okay, we're both going through the same hell. How is it you're handling this very differently than me? Well, tell me about that. And they're sharing Jesus. And they get to Poland, they get to Slovakia, they get to the Czech Republic, they get to these other nations, and they are light and salt. And the outcry that we are getting from these countries, just their own fear of potentially Russian invasion coming all the way to their borders, into their soil, and then as they engage and really interact with Ukrainian believers. So it's really a statement to show Jesus' words are right. You know, we engage in Scripture, we lean on Him, we get those amazing gifts that the Spirit provides. We get that love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, et cetera. People who are listening know those. But it's real. It's not just words. It's real. Because people really don't care what you say until they watch the way you behave.
Yes.
And if I claim to be a Christian, but I am so distraught over the news and over, anything gets me upset just to my wit's end. Man, a non-believer has that. What do they want Jesus for? There's no difference. But these folks are showing a difference. Doesn't mean they like it. Doesn't mean they want this. But they are grounded. And you've got a large population that is saying, give me that hope. Tell me what this life is about.
Let me just mention that, again, we do have a link to the website there, but let me also point out that the book that you co-wrote, The Impossible Dream, The Unstoppable Journey of God's Word Behind the Iron Curtain and Beyond, there's a way, if you go to the website there, to get 2 free chapters. So even before you maybe want to order the book, you can actually see what is in it. And so that is something else that's on the website. But if you would like to know a little bit more, EEM.org. And again, you can find all the information there. And if you have a heart for giving Bibles to people that are hungry for God's Word, I would encourage you to check them out. So, Dirk, thank you so very much for being with us. And we look forward to the future opportunity to maybe hear a few more of those stories.
Kerby, look forward to it. Thank you very much. Have a great day, brother.
Going to take a break, and when we come back, I will give you maybe a warning. We're going to talk about a very important issue, which, by the way, has come out of Venezuela, but all from other countries as well, human trafficking. You have Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and so this new film called Still Hope. Now, again, we'll be very careful, but sometimes I know we have young ears hearing these programs, and so next hour we'll spend just about a half an hour talking about this film. film. We're going to be talking with the actress involved as well as the director. I think you're going to benefit from this, and it may be a film that you will want to see. We have all sorts of information about that, but I just thought I'd give you an advance warning of what we'll cover next hour. Then we're going to get back into this whole issue of what is happening in Venezuela. What are the next steps? First of all, maybe answering some of the myths that have surfaced. What could actually be the future for Venezuela, and some very significant warnings and dangers to talk about. So we've got a lot to cover in the second hour. We'll be right back.
In 19th century London, two towering historical figures did battle, not with guns and bombs, but words and ideas. London was home to Karl Marx, the father of communism, and legendary Baptist preacher Charles Spurgeon. London was in many ways the center of the world, economically, militarily, and intellectually. Marx sought to destroy religion, the family, and everything the Bible supports. Spurgeon stood against him, warning of socialism's dangers. Spurgeon understood Christianity is not just religious truth, it is truth for all of life. Where do you find men with that kind of wisdom to stand against darkness today? Get the light you need on today's most pressing issues delivered to your inbox when you sign up for the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Every weekday, in less than 2 minutes, you'll learn how to be a person of light to stand against darkness in our time. It's free, so visit pointofview.net/signup right now. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we're going to spend some time talking about a film that you will want to know about, which is going to premiere February 5th through the 9th, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute. Second half hour today, we will get back to the issue of Venezuela, because we want to answer some of the other questions people have about what does the future look like, what are some of the myths that maybe need to be answered, and the rest. And really, when you talk about Venezuela, you, of course, already understand that this issue of human trafficking is important. And I remember decades ago when we first started talking about this on Point of View, at first there were people that would sometimes call in when we'd open up the phones saying, I don't think this is a problem. You're making a big deal out of nothing, because I don't hear the mainstream press talking about this. I think this is just something you're pursuing just to maybe get people all scared. And of course, now I think everybody recognizes the problem with sexual trafficking and human trafficking. And if anything, now there's a need for hope. Hence the title of this film, Still Hope. I think you're going to appreciate the kind of conversation we're going to have about that. And again, we have information about the film and about our two guests. First of all, Luna Rivera is an actress originally from Miami, Florida. She plays Hope in the film Still Hope. She's got quite a resume already. She's been in Seesaw, Ordinary Joe, Secrets in the Sisterhood. And Luna, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you so much for having me.
Richie Johns is also the co-owner of Studio 523. We have a link to that. We also have a link to information about the film. That is a production company that he runs with his wife and business partner, and as an individual that has really been focusing a lot of his time and attention on that, and Still Hope is his directorial debut. So, Richie, thank you for being with us as well.
Hey, thanks so much, Kerby. Happy to be here.
Well, Luna, let me come to you for just a minute. We need to tell your story. 16-year-old Hope finds herself in danger. You find out your friend isn't exactly what you expected. You get forced into sexual trafficking, and in some respects could be even desire to just give up hope, but eventually, after dealing with all that, reunites with your family that never gave up looking for you. But then the struggle isn't over because it continues on. And in some respects, you had to play a very difficult role. But over the years, as we've talked with and interviewed people that have gone through this, I think they can illustrate what you are showing on the screen of what has taken place to them. Can you tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, portraying hope, it, is what everybody goes, what the victims and people have gone through. It was emotionally, I would say emotionally demanding and, a meaningful experience, of course, as an actor. The biggest thing I wanted to make sure that I did was respect the survivor's experience, portraying the pain and resilience without the exaggeration of, what some films usually sort of like put out. But yeah, Hope for me, her journey is honest and it's true. She's a full human, who has gone through a lot. And what I appreciate so much about this film so much is that it's not just like sensationalizing, for example, the trauma. It focuses on, who she is and who she is becoming. And I think that a lot of people would appreciate that within the film, that it's not just about the crime itself, if not just the journey that people go through after.
Yes. Well, first of all, I just think you are to be commended for acting in a very difficult role. But I thought for just a minute, Richie, let me come to you. To actually have your debut as a director, this is a tough film to start with because it is something which very quickly do people, if they're watching this, understand how awful it is and how devastating it is for the individuals. And yet you've got to, as Luna said just a minute ago, not to sugarcoat it, not to make it, everything is roses at the end, because this is something that affects so many individuals. And the film is not only a warning, but I've heard you say in some of the various press releases that it's more than a film, it's a movement. Why so?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It's really a call to action, for us. We had a few different goals when coming in to make this film. It was created to educate, and mobilize viewers. We want to use this piece to raise awareness. And I think that's the biggest thing is, some of the other trafficking films that have come out before, like Luna said, we didn't want to sensationalize any of the action of it. But for us, it's a story that took place in just a regular, Midwest town. And we wanted it to come across. It could happen to anyone. And so we want this to be a resource for parents to educate, and also to, pick up where most trafficking stories really leave off.
Right.
Most of them focus on the rescue. And so hope shines a light on what happens after. And we want to talk about the complex road to healing that, these warriors face after they find freedom. But we also didn't want to gloss over how hard it was. The way I kind of approach this is the way, think about Easter weekend, right? Sometimes we like to skip over Good Friday and just jump right to the celebration. But we often forget that, no, Good Friday is hard. The Son of God died. And it's okay to, I think oftentimes we just like to just gloss over it and just skip it and just jump to the celebration. And so we can't fully get to the end of the film, which is ultimately about forgiveness, without diving into the painful road. And I think that's what's going to stand out to a lot of people when they watch the film.
Well, and again, the point you made just real quickly is maybe worth camping out on for a moment, and that is just a typical Midwestern town. I think the argument is as well, this happens to individuals that are engaged in really destructive behavior, or they're in particular areas where they're more vulnerable. But if you take the data from the National Human Trafficking Hotline, 9,600 reports of trafficking cases, estimating almost 17,000 victims. This could happen in any community, and over time we have told stories on this program about how sometimes it has happened in just a typical kind of suburban community right here in the United States.
Yeah. We in the two stories that the two journeys that inspired the story of Hope. That's exactly like it happened, very innocently. Hope's journey, she thinks she's going on a date with someone she can trust, and it turns out that they are not who they say they are. And yeah, it can really, especially in this day and age with technology, it can happen to anyone.
Let me just mention we're going to take a break. We'll come back and talk for a few more minutes, but this would be a good time for you to go to stillhopemovie.com. Don't have to remember all that, because if you just simply go to our website, pointofview.net, you can click on the picture of Luna Rivera, and that will take you there, or click on the picture of Richie Johns, which will actually take you to Studio 523, and then you can scroll down and see it there. Now, when you're there, you actually have enough time if you would like to watch the trailer, and also there's a place which talks about tickets. So we're going to come back and talk about what are some of the resources that are available. This might be something which you could do with a youth group. This could be something you do with your Sunday school class. We talk about this so often. My own Sunday school class will oftentimes get enough people involved. We almost book out the theater and watch it together and then have a conversation afterwards. So there's a lot more we want to cover. But first of all, we wanted you to know that the film is coming out February 5th through the 9th. You can find it in your local theater. We'll come back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Last month, the Trump administration issued a national security strategy. The document has traditionally been a list of national security concerns and how the administration plans to deal with them. The Trump document is different and thus has been controversial. The paper reminds Americans that the past few decades have been chaotic. I suspect that the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, had significant input since it argues that America lost its way after the Cold War. This is what the senator said on my radio program 2 years ago when we talked about his book, Decades of Decadence. Another accurate but controversial comment was the concern that Europe is experiencing civilizational erasure. Victor Davis Hanson says this is advice given to help, but it has been received by Europeans as condescending and interference into their internal affairs. The economic part of the paper is obviously aimed at China. The Trump administration doesn't want China to be dominant. It suggests we continue to maintain a triangular type of strategic relationship between Russia and China. This, Hansen explains, does not allow those two powers, one with 7,000 nuclear weapons and a huge amount of oil, the other with 1.4 billion people and probably the largest conventional military, to combine strategically. Finally, it also puts emphasis on the Monroe Doctrine, or a new Monroe Doctrine often called the Trump Corollary. We cannot have Russians and Chinese and Iranians involved in narco-terrorism in the case of Venezuela. We cannot allow cartels to make billions from human trafficking and fentanyl. If you want to understand American foreign policy in 2026, just read the Trump administration's national security strategy. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view of genetic engineering, go to viewpoints.info/genetic engineering. Viewpoints.info/genetic engineering. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again as we talk about this issue of human trafficking. Next month will be Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and of course an opportunity in the first few weeks, or actually the first few days of February, to watch this. This is a very important film, Still Hope. Also, it is something that you can get information about. In just a minute, we'll talk about some of the organizations they partnered with, including the Pure Hope Foundation. But Luna, let me come back to you for just a minute, because we were talking about the fact that much of this is really dependent and built upon some really true stories. And I'd love to know how you kind of got into the role. I know some actors like to go and read the stories or meet the victims. How did you kind of get ready to play Hope?
Yeah, it was great. I fortunately got to talk to the girls that Hope's journey was inspired by. Richie was absolutely phenomenal in helping me prepare throughout the entire month of pre-production. We were constantly in communication, writing every single day about, the script. I also took it upon myself to do a little bit more research, of course, just so that I can understand a little bit more on what essentially happens and what people go through. Not even because after reading the script, I obviously end up finding out too that it's not just about, like most films that we talked about before. Most films talk about the rescue, and that's like the end of it. So I wanted to do a little bit of a deeper dive. So essentially that's what I did. Richie and I basically were in communication 24/7, going through the script, and then I just did a little bit more research on a couple of things that I can find, maybe some documentaries of, listening to what people go through. Sure. And that helped me get into the headspace, of course, of hope, essentially, to be able to tell the story.
What would you say to parents that say, I'd like my daughter to watch this, but I'm wondering how young and how explicit it is in terms of what would be on the screen, because we always like to give a parental warning if necessary. What would you say?
Yeah, what I liked about this film is that we don't have like any shock factors. Everything is very, what's the word? It's implied. So you're not going to see anything that's very explicit. Now there's some moments where, Hope's character is getting, hit, and you do see that. And you also see there's a part of it as well where she is getting drugged, or, the actual kidnapping aspect of it. But in terms of the explicitness of, any content that is explicit, you won't see any of that.
And Richie, I'm glad you did that, because we certainly like to recommend any kind of film, but we also like to get some kind of disclaimer. But I thought for just a few minutes we might talk about resources, because as you pointed out, it's more than a film, it's a movement. And if you click on the button that says resources, first of all, there's a place where you can learn and equip yourself. And I think that's going to be key, because in some respects, we are wanting to recognize that very naive young girls sometimes fall into and stumble into situations that they could have avoided. And so that's important. I think it's important for the church to really click on that button and learn more, because they need to certainly provide some of that guidance. And quite frankly, it's quite likely that many of us will be in a church where somebody has gone through this, and to really address that. So you have a whole resource section there just so people can equip themselves. And also there's a place where they can become an ambassador with Pure Hope Foundation, which I know you've partnered with. Can you speak to those issues?
Yeah, definitely. Oh, it's important for us, for people to know that community is a key part, of the healing process, right? The second half of the film, we give it away. She gets rescued, right? But the second half, we really focus on how essential volunteers and advocates are to the healing journey. And so that's why the Still Hope Project was created, to move beyond just awareness, right? Everybody, not everybody, a large majority of the population understands about this issue, but we want to move people beyond awareness and into action. And so that's why we've created meaningful opportunities for people to get involved. One of the easiest ways is, purchasing a ticket to go see the film. All of the proceeds that are generated from this film are going right back into ministry, and we are very proud of that. And so we want churches and groups to go support the film. That's the first thing that they can do. Invite their friends to go see the film, but then go to the Still Hope movie website, click on that resource page, and there you can learn statistics and partner with these great organizations that we have on there. And there's many more that aren't just listed on that website, but these are some key ones that we have vetted that people can go and join this collective effort to end sex trafficking.
Let's talk about two different ways to do it. Obviously, the tickets, February 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And so when you go to tickets, you can pick that up. And if you know what your zip code is, and everybody does, then that shows you theaters where that can take place. And I hope that we get a good turnout for that. But there's also a place for hosting a screening, which I assume is going to be in the future after it's made its debut in the theaters. And I found that that can be a very significant outreach as well. There are individuals in our community that maybe I'll never get them to church. I might get them into a movie theater, but even that's a bit of a stretch. But to get them to come into my home or to see a screening might be a little better. And these are, I think, other ways to really, as you said, move it beyond a film and make it a movement, right?
Exactly. And that's what we are hoping that, it's a call to action. And hopefully, people that experience this film might have an opportunity where they find forgiveness themselves. It's transformational. We hope that the Holy Spirit can move through this film, and maybe people find a way to forgive others, or it might be a healing process for them too if they have had any sort of trauma in their life.
Liz, if we can also talk about who you have partnered with, and that is Pure Hope Foundation. We're broadcasting today from Dallas, but just down the road is where it is located. And so this is just an opportunity for people to know a little bit more about the possibility of addressing that issue, maybe even being able to be one of those ambassadors. So that's another thing that sort of springs out of the film, isn't it?
Indeed. Yeah, we were so thankful for Catherine Lee and the team over at Pure Hope Foundation. They are just so wonderful and really walking the ministry they have there. I'd encourage you to go to their website and check it out. And the way that they help restore these young women who have endured sex trafficking, they do a really great job, and we want to support their ministry all that we can.
Sure. Again, the film is coming out February 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th. And if you want to know more, you can click on the picture right there, right next to Luna's picture, or you can go to stillhopemovie.com. If you click on the button that says buy tickets, you can pick that date, and then that particular date will then pop up for those of you that have a particular location, and you will find many opportunities for you to be part of it. It's another one of the Fathom films, and it is just a great opportunity to educate you and your community about sexual abuse, about human trafficking, about the need to get involved. I would encourage you to invite other members of your church. If you know people that are in law enforcement, I think it would be really important for them to maybe be sensitized to some of this. If you know people that are maybe involved in counseling, this is another aspect of the film as well. So, Richie, just before we go, did I kind of hit all the buttons there? Because it does seem to me that there's some great opportunities to use this film as it actually premieres in the theaters February 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th, and 9th.
Exactly. Yeah. We want to fill those theaters up. Invite your friends, churches, organizations. Churches can go to the website and contact us to do larger, theater buyouts. You can contact your local theater. All of it is, going to this collective effort, and we need everybody. So we're excited for the film to release to create this awareness, and hopefully it sparks a movement.
Well, Luna, let me say, first of all, we look forward to seeing you in the film, but also look forward to seeing you in other films. You've built quite a resume already, so it is just a delight to have you on the program. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And Richie, thank you for directing it and having enough understanding about the fact that rather than being a one-night event, it can be a movement. And so thank you for what you've done as well. So look forward to seeing the film, and thank you for being with us today here on Point of View.
Thanks so much, Kerby.
Let's take a break. When we come back to the issue of Venezuela. Certainly some of the questions we've been answering, but there are many others, and so we'll do our best in the last half hour to see if we can tackle a couple others that you need to know about. And let me also mention that if you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to read it for myself, we have posted a couple of very good articles we'll be talking about in just a few minutes. So again, go to the website pointofview.net. You can find out more about Eastern European missions, about this film, and of course some of the material I've posted on the subject of Venezuela. A lot we've covered today, and we will probably cover a lot more this week. So let's take a break. We'll be back with more right after this.
At Point of View, we believe there is power in prayer, and that is why we have relaunched our Pray for America campaign, a series of weekly emails to unite Americans in prayer for our nation. Imagine if hundreds of thousands of Americans started praying intentionally together on a weekly basis. You can help make that a reality by subscribing to our Pray for America emails. Just go to pointofview.net and click on the Pray for America banner that's right there on the homepage. Each week you'll receive a brief news update, a specific prayer guide, and a free resource to equip you in further action. We encourage you to not only pray with us each week, but to share these prayers and the resources with others in your life. Join the movement today. Visit pointofview.net and click on the banner Pray for America right there at the top. That's pointofview.net. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in our land. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, let's, if we can, talk about what's next for Venezuela. As difficult as it was and complex as it was to capture Nicolas Maduro, and again, he's claimed to be not guilty, but we know where this is going to take us. The next steps may be even more difficult and more complex. First of all, just thinking about the economy, I have this growing collection of various currencies that are worth virtually nothing. This is, for example, 100 or 100 bolivars from Venezuela, which again is probably not worth the paper it's printed on. But even this one, 1 million bolivars, I'll hold that up there, you can see for those of you watching online, just illustrates the fact that was hearing an interview that was done the other day with Maria Corina Machado, who of course is the one that won the Nobel Peace Prize, in which she pointed out at one point that the bolivar's prices were doubling every 4 days. So whether you look at what happened in Weimar, Germany, what has happened in Lebanon, what has happened in Argentina, or especially what has happened in Venezuela, you can recognize why they were looking for something else, like Bitcoin or something, to actually even retain any value whatsoever. And at first, many of them were going after various other kinds of ways to save, simply because when you're under such massive inflation, where do you go from here? Now, of course, I think one of the things that is hopefully going to be helpful is the reestablishment of some sources of income. Venezuela is, again, one of those interesting ironies, one of the most, if you will, mineral-rich countries in the world, which is also one of the poorest countries in the world. So it is quite possible to turn that around, but that gets us from economic issues into the political issues, because as soon as, of course, Nicolas Maduro was taken, you then had the decision being made by the Supreme Court of Venezuela to name Dulce Rodriguez, who has been the country's vice president, as the interim president. And so as a result, she is an individual that has been sanctioned by the U.S., and by the European Union. And, of course, we didn't hear, at least in the press conference the other day, that President Trump said there was going to be new elections, though I think that's pretty much where we're headed. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said on Sunday that elections need to be held eventually, but didn't necessarily make it sound like that was urgent. When he was on CBS Face the Nation, he says, look, we want drug trafficking to stop. We want no more gang members to come our way. We don't want to see the Iranian and, by the way, Cuban presence in the past. We want the oil industry in that country not to go to the benefit of pirates and adversaries of the United States, but in the benefit of the people. So that is the case. But let's, if we can, for just a minute, focus on who this woman, Dulce Rodriguez, is. And if you dig just a little bit, you realize we still have problems with her in charge. She has been described as a loyalist to, of course, Nicolas Maduro. She's a hardline socialist. Don't take my word for it. New York Times described her as impeccable leftist credentials. It described her as a daughter of the Marxist guerrilla who won fame for kidnapping an American businessman. She also headed up the Venezuelan intelligence service. And the United Nations is determined that they have repressed dissent through crimes against humanity, including, again, this is the United Nations saying, including acts of torture and sexual violence. Her, Dulce Rodriguez, and her brother have been seen as the real leaders of the criminal network, long known as the Cartel de los Soles, which is, of course, the idea of the street groups that have been involved in that, and actually has been designated by the United States government, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, as a foreign terrorist organization. You have the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights that have documented what they call grave and systemic human rights violations. In June of 2018, the European Union imposed sanctions on her, declaring that she and 10 other Venezuelan officials were responsible for human rights violations and for undermining democracy and the rule of law in Venezuela. And, of course, you have had the U.S. Treasury Department impose sanctions on her as well. One of the individuals writing about this actually said that she is responsible for a list of crimes larger or longer than a CVS receipt, and in some respects is almost indistinguishable from Nicolas Maduro, which, of course, led to some of the questions that were asked of the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, why didn't you capture more? But he made it very clear how difficult it was to capture two, and that depended upon knowing where to go at the time, which room to catch them before they go into the safe house, and all the things that made this a very successful military operation. Now, let's be honest, if I were a tin hat dictator right now, I would be a little bit concerned about what would be the next move. And I think it is interesting that she actually had a conversation with the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, in which she was described as being quite gracious. But then let's also recognize that she became very defiant in her tone when they weren't on the phone. And as a matter of fact, even said that she wanted to provide honor and glory to the 32 Cuban brothers who were killed during the criminal military aggression of the United States against the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. So those were the 32 individuals that were killed during the military operation. 32 Cubans killed, no Americans killed, which, again, is pretty amazing. But I think it illustrates, again, that some of the tough times are still ahead, and that's why we need to maybe pay attention to that as well. Just before we take a break, one of the things that I came across, I didn't post it because I didn't want to have too many articles up there, by Michael Waller, nine reasons, he says, why Trump's Venezuelan operation is great for America. Number one, it took out the head of a major international organized crime cartel. the cartel, which the U.S. has labeled the Cartel de los Soles, or the Cartel of the Suns. As I just pointed out, Dulce Rodriguez still seems like she's running that, so let's not overplay that. But nevertheless, they have been responsible for narco-terrorism, flooding the United States with fentanyl, cocaine, and a variety of other things, which, of course, has funded this whole terrorist organization. Number two, it took out the leader who flooded the United States with hardened criminals, organized terrorist gangs like Tren de Aragua, and millions of refugees. As I mentioned just a minute ago, 8 million refugees, not all, of course, came to the United States, but certainly have flooded out of that country. We're hoping eventually there will be a draw back to that country because of the economic opportunities that might exist. Number three, took out the leader of an international terrorist organization. Of course, that one is already one we mentioned a minute ago. Number four, took out the sponsor of Hezbollah and other jihadists in our southern maritime border. And so, again, we've had some of the statements by Maria Corina Machado that said Hamas is there, Hezbollah is there, of course, Russian, Iranians, terrorist groups of all sorts are there. Number five, took out the sponsor of Iranian surveillance and these kamikaze drones on our southern maritime border. Number six, it took out a major supply of cash to the Iranian force responsible for killing hundreds of Americans in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's a scheme that Nicolas Maduro ran, in which Iran exchanged fuel and gold to fund the IRGC and even the Quds Forest, which is, of course, a terrorist organization. Number seven, deprived Communist China of plans to deploy its navy around Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, and the Panama Canal. Number eight, it restored and modernized our 200-year-old Monroe Doctrine. Since 1823, the Monroe Doctrine, implemented by our last founding father president, James Monroe, kept foreign empires from exerting their presence in the Americas. And number nine, the operation was not a war. It did not attempt to destroy the Venezuelan military. Its command and control are the regime's power structures. That was a debate taking place on some of the talking head shows over the weekend. Are we at war? Well, no. But to say that it was anything more than a police operation maybe stretches the definition a bit. We'll come back. We'll get into a little bit more of that, but I suspect we'll be talking about Venezuela for quite some time over the next week. And if you find yourself saying, okay, I'd like to read some of these articles for myself, we'll come back and read one of the pieces by Gerald Buckler and Baker about some of the myths associated with the capture of Nicolas Maduro. All that coming up right after this.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me just mention some of the articles we have posted for you today. One on the whole issue of whether or not the actions were constitutional, a very good piece, which goes on for 5 pages, or I guess 4 pages. John, you are getting into some of that. One that I just mentioned briefly, which goes into some detail about Don't Settle for Maduro 2.0 and a variety of other issues that we can address. And another one I'll get to in just a minute, 4 myths about the capture of Nicolas Maduro and the reality. But before we do so, it occurred to me that there's still a few pieces that we didn't cover, so let me mention those real quickly. The first is, okay, economic development. I just held up the almost worthless currency from Venezuela, but what can get this country back on its feet? Well, oil is an obvious one, and there is a very good article that came out recently on the overthrow of President Nicolas Maduro could pave the way for ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips to recover the assets that were seized in Venezuela by the nationalization of the oil industry. Now, the only oil company, I believe, that's operating right now in Venezuela is Chevron, so they're probably the best position to grow production if there is some kind of orderly transition And let's hope that there is, because I raised some very good questions about who at the moment is serving as the interim president in Venezuela. And so the argument is that this could pave the way for many of the oil major companies to actually extract and refine the crude oil reserves there in Venezuela. President Trump called for the companies to invest billions of dollars in Venezuela's energy sector. And he says we're going to have very large U.S. oil companies, the biggest anywhere in the world, go in, spend billions of dollars, fix the badly broken infrastructure and oil infrastructure, which, by the way, is significant. And for those of you that pay attention to the stock market, turns out that the shares of Chevron, ExxonMobil, and ConocoPhillips are rising rather dramatically as investors are betting that those three U.S. companies will cash in after this military action. Again, recognizing that the estimates are that the oil reserves in Venezuela, 303 billion barrels, or about 17% of the global total, which again is very significant. So the potential for economic development is there, but the question, of course, is the political issues as well. I haven't talked much about the critical comments, but I at least need to mention that we do have a socialist in this country. His name is Zoran Mamdani, who is now the mayor of New York. And once he heard about what was happening in Venezuela, called President Trump and berated him. And, of course, the old joke is maybe they should have sent someone to capture the socialist here instead of the one in Venezuela. Although Nicaragua is another one that we're concerned about as well. That, I think, is sending shockwaves, by the way, since when I mentioned that, you were talking about Cuba, Nicaragua, Colombia, Venezuela. These are some countries which, interesting enough, except for Cuba, most have at least cooperated in some way with the United States. Venezuela actually trying to counter what we were doing, but we will see how this unfolds over the next few weeks. But our last article is by Gerard Baker, and this is one that he writes about the 4 myths about the capture of Nicolas Maduro. And the first myth is that this was a law enforcement operation to bring justice to notorious narcotics trafficker. The official stated reason, he says, for Operation Absolute Resolve is less plausible because in some respects it isn't a war because we haven't gone after military, but it's a little bit more than a military action. But nevertheless, he says, I have high regard for Jay Clayton, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, and I have no doubt that he will bring a watertight case against Mr. and Mrs. Maduro because no one will buy any of the statements they're making. So if nothing else, that may be the first myth. Myth number 2, the removal of Mr. Maduro will result in an energy bonanza for the United States. And as he points out, the prospect of access to oil was certainly a big factor, sitting on 300 billion barrels of oil. But nevertheless, there is a flawed thinking about this right now. The heavy oil isn't easily extracted, although it is more easily refined in some of the refineries in the United States than in that country. So we'll see how that plays out as well. Given the fact that we have so much energy out there right now, we're dealing with, was it $50 a barrel right now in terms of production costs? So may not generate a boon for the United States, but I think it could do nothing but raise the standard of living for people in Venezuela. Myth number 3, the latest exercise in U.S.-led regime change represents the ultimate discrediting of America First foreign policy restrainers. He points out that, let's just be honest, Donald Trump's foreign policy was never America only. America First was illustrated by the fact that even in his first term, let's remind everybody, he had successful strikes against Iran's Qasem Soleimani and against the Islamic State Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. So let's recognize that even in the second one with the attack on Iran's nuclear facilities, when he deems it necessary, we will use military action. And number 4, the operation, this is myth number 4, the operation is a disastrous break with U.S. historical respect for international law. I think I already sort of given you a pretty good argument of that from John Yoo, and there's some other great articles there as well. But Gerald Baker puts it this way. First, the United States has a long history of removing unfriendly leaders on questionable legal grounds going back at least 3/4 of a century, from Iran's Mohammad Mogdehe, which is 1953, to Chile's Salvador Allende, to in 1973, of course, Panama's Manuel Noriega in 1989, although he was actually removed in 1990, to Iraq's Saddam Hussein in 2003, and many more in between. So the argument that this is unprecedented is not true, and I think he handles that myth as well. And as you can see, he's kind of an equal opportunity grief giver. He disagrees with some of the arguments being made by, for example, Donald Trump and as well as Marco Rubio, but also disagrees with some of the criticism coming against them as well. So if you'd like to read a little bit more about this issue, if you'd like some of the facts and figures, we tried to go through this in a much more systematic way because there is a lot of misinformation, a lot of claims and counterclaims. Can we at least agree on the data and the facts on the ground before we engage in some of the finger pointing that is obviously going to be taking place over the next couple of weeks? That's why I hope that you'll continue tuning into Point of View. I want to try to give you as much facts and figures, news, information, and commentary as possible. Tomorrow we'll have a look at some theological issues, and then we'll come back to some of the political issues that you certainly need to know more about. So I hope that you'll take the time to visit the website. You can find out more about Eastern European missions. You can find out more about this film, Still Hope, and hopefully you'll find some of these articles I've posted helping you to know more about what is happening in Venezuela, maybe trying to dismiss a few of the myths surrounding it as well. We'll be doing that all through the week, and we'll, of course, have our Friday weekend edition where we'll probably cover this in even more detail. Thank you for listening to Point of View today. I hope you'll join us tomorrow. Certainly going to be getting into a variety of different topics again. And there's never a lack for things to talk about, which is why I hope you tune into Point of View every day to learn more about some of these issues as we learn together. I want to thank Megan for her help engineering the program. Steve, thank you for producing the program. See you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
Where does moral truth come from? According to 58% of Americans, individuals determine moral truth. A quarter of Generation Z says society determines moral truth, and morality can even change over time. Only 42% of Americans believe that truth comes from God. I don't know about you, but I find these numbers extremely troubling. It really is a crisis of truth, and that crisis has consequences. Look at society. Evil is called good, good called evil. People with biblical beliefs are called bigots, or worse, they're canceled. But there is hope. The Bible promises the truth will set us free, and that's why Point of View is relentless in our commitment to the ultimate source of moral truth, God's Word. At Point of View, we know that God's truth is eternal, and if we stand together, we can help more Americans apply His truth in their daily life. Help Americans find truth again by giving at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.